Hey guys, Taki here. It's been less than a month since their last product release, which means it's time again for another Anbernic handheld. This is the rgcube, a premium niche handheld with a ton of power and a square screen. In this video, we're going to go over all the things you need to know if you're thinking about getting one. Starting out with the specs, the rgcube comes with the Unisoc T820 SoC. This is an 8-core chip with one prime core clocked at 2.7 GHz. We also have a Mali G57 GPU, 8 GB of RAM, 128 GB of UFS storage, a 5200 mAh battery, and a 3.95-inch 1x1 display. When it comes to pricing, Anbernic has the rgcube on sale for the first few days of the launch, as they always do, with a slightly discounted price of $160, give or take, depending on the platform. This is without shipping, and this price will increase to $170 after the promo ends. Obviously, this is not the first modern 1x1 handheld. The RGB30 came out not that long ago, and I believe it uses the same screen. There is one important difference with the panel that we'll talk about in a moment, but I want to talk about the differences between these. I think many people are hoping that the Cube will be a direct upgrade over almost everything in the RGB30, and based on the spec sheet that we just saw, this shouldn't be a heavy lift. When I did my review on this, I said it was a super niche device, but it was awesome. For things that could take advantage of a 1x1 display, I said this would be the best option until someone came in and made something better. Apparently, Anbernic was watching the response to that handheld, and they decided that they would throw their hat in the ring. They seem to have improved on some of the obvious issues with the RGB30 in terms of controls and ergonomics. I'm actually reminded of the AYANEO Air when I have the Cube in my hands. There were no fewer than 1,000 versions of this, and they all came out before the Cube. I have to believe that Anbernic used this as a basis for their design. The analog sticks and the ring lights are very similar, but they did opt for a circle D-pad. If you just look at the bottom 4 buttons, they flipped the buttons on an axis and modified start and select. There are a lot of little things that Anbernic tried to carry over to this, and if I just remove this logo on the back and change the surface paint, I could be fooled into thinking this was an AYA device. Let's move over to start talking about controls, and there's a lot that is good here, which is kind of surprising. Usually, it's a big red flag when I see a handheld with a circle D-pad because most things on the market are bad. This one isn't perfect, but it's not bad. When it comes to modern examples of this done well, I always go to the M30 or the Retro Flag Classic 2.4G. These do a great job of capturing how this is supposed to feel. Outside of that, we have 2 Nintendo Switch analog sticks, and I know a lot of people would have liked if the left one was on the bottom. That would probably be the better option to go with than what they did here, but you know, they like to keep their options open. If one device was too perfect, there would be no reason for you to buy the next one. I'm saying that in jest, but sometimes that seems to be the case. The ABXY buttons use conductive rubber, and they feel normal. That being said, a neutral color option would have been nice on this shell. The circle D-pad comes in at 22.5 millimeters, so not too big, not too small. The face buttons are slightly smaller than normal, especially compared to other handhelds of this size. There should be enough room here for slightly bigger buttons, but I don't think it will matter once you get used to this. When we look at the top, it's awesome to see that Anbernic did not go with inline shoulder buttons this time around. R1 and L1 use pretty loud switches, and I would have liked to see them go with something that makes less noise. You can judge it for yourself from this audio recording. I feel like these kinds of smaller details are things that Anbernic loses when they're trying to work on so many devices at the same time. I think if this one was in the oven a bit longer, you would see a lot of small quality of life improvements that add up to a better user experience. On the other side of this, we have R2 and L2, and those feel nice. These are analog shoulder buttons, and they correctly report analog values inside Android. There is one tiny issue with R2 that sounds as if it's scratching against the shell when I'm using it. I don't know if the mic will pick up on this, but this is how it sounds. By the way, both of my Cube devices have this issue. That just leaves us with the volume and power buttons on the side. The power button is a bit annoying to get to at times, so I wish they would have placed this on the top. This one is recessed in the shell, and I'm not a big fan of it. There's nothing on the bottom in terms of control or I/O, but we do have 2 speakers. You'll notice that there's no Type-C port on the bottom here, but there's a very good reason for this that we'll look at later in the video. When it comes to the standard D-pad testing that I always do, I don't have any big issues with this in platforming games or in normal fighters. I will say the button presses do not feel as smooth as they do on the M30. The only real issue with the button itself is that they have a pretty sharp 90-degree angle on the cardinals that can start to dig into your thumb if you find yourself rolling your thumb around a lot. The two reference controllers have a rounded edge that feels better to use. Beyond that, I don't have any complaints about the ABXY buttons. They use conductive rubber and they work well. Now it's time to switch gears and talk about the screen. There are a lot of important things in this section. I would say this is probably the most important section of the entire video if you're thinking about getting this, because it's not as simple as just taking the RGB30 screen and slapping on a new shell. There are some things that are different. First, we do have a fairly bright display on this, and the minimum brightness level is quite decent. I was playing this last night in bed with it set to the lowest level, and I didn't feel like I was going to disturb anyone from the screen. And just to show you, this is the full brightness range. The slider goes a bit crazy if you hold it like this, but that's just Anbernic software for you. One of the things that I'm noticing with this display is that it's pretty saturated. It's not that obvious with this game, so we'll need to change over to another, and I'll grab my RGB30 so we can see the difference. Right away, you'll see the reds are super saturated compared to this one, and at least based on my eyes, this one looks closer to how it's supposed to look. You'll also see a big difference in Donkey Kong. His skin is almost red on this, whereas the RGB30 looks closer to how this is supposed to look. When we hop into the first level, it's easier to see. Anything that has some amount of red in it is boosted. The greens are also boosted, but not as much as the reds. The red shift on this screen is a little too high for my liking. The other issue with this display is it has a pretty high amount of light bleeding. I don't think that I'm the first person to mention this, but I may end up talking about it in greater detail because it's very important. To have a better chance of getting this on camera, we're going to go into RA and enable some settings to give us big black borders around the whole screen. With the lights on, it's not that easy to see the light bleed, so we'll need to cut the studio lights. After we do that, it's easy to see that this screen looks far worse than the RGB30 in terms of light bleed. We have two small sections on the other side of the top that show up in this example. The RGB30 also has some small light bleed in some spots, but it's nowhere near the cube. I increased the ISO and put a black PNG on both of my RG cubes. You can see they are pretty close, and I wonder if we can fix this by loosening some screws on the inside. This is not something that you want to see on an expensive handheld. In this section, we're going to go over an overview of the software, and since I've already set up my white one, I kept this one stock so we can go over what it comes with. After you finish the new user wizard, you'll be popped out into this with a ton of emulators. Some of them are pre-configured with things that you won't want to delete, like Citra. They have a theme enabled for this screen. Almost everything else here is garbage bloatware that can be deleted, especially these .mu emulators. The stock system does come with the Play Store and an OTA app, but it is 100% possible this device will never see a software update. Here is my main unit. It also has the animated wallpaper, and I plan to replace that when I get a chance. I've installed a bunch of stuff on this, and I've organized them inside these folders. In the pull-down menu, we have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth controls, but we also have fan controls. I usually just keep this on auto, and I haven't had any issues with it. It doesn't make a lot of noise. There's also a toggle option for the RGB ring light. I know some people hate these ring lights because they think these waste a lot of power, so let's set the ring lights to white and find out how much they use. With the lights on and nothing else running, we're sitting at a charge drain of 500 milliamps. If we turn off the lights, that drops down to 360 milliamps. You might think that isn't a big deal, but it could mean a lot of extra battery life if you were playing something that was super light like GB or GBC. Outside of that, we have a performance toggle that is either set to auto or high. If you set this to high, it will lock your frequencies to the max. On this chip, there aren't many instances where you would need to use this option, so I usually just leave this on auto. In cases where I don't have enough performance, changing this to high does nothing. This is mainly useful for GPU controls. The only other important thing here is some button customization options. I have this set to Nintendo style with analog triggers, and I think the other options are easy enough to understand. The last software feature is this Anbernic launcher, which is not great. There are many better options than this, but it does work after you add your games, so at least it's there if you're in a pinch. This is the part of the video where I plan to talk about the console mode. In my RGB30 review, I said the console mode was the saving grace of this device because it allowed you to play games with a 16:9 screen. I thought we would be able to do the same thing on this, but from what I can see, it doesn't work. To demonstrate this, I have a display that supports DisplayPort, and this is what happens after I fight with it to get video out. The monitor is sent a 1x1 video signal, and from everything that I can see, there doesn't seem to be a way to fix this. Rebooting doesn't fix this, and it also doesn't work on my other DP monitors. The next issue is that DisplayPort to HDMI adapters don't seem to work at all. This leads me to believe that they're using some non-standard video signal on the Cube because other devices like the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro have no issues with this. It just works. They filmed a video with the Cube seemingly connected to a monitor, but it doesn't make sense because their display doesn't match what is on the monitor like mine. Mine is clearly in mirrored mode, but that's not what we need for this. I also want to talk about Type-C charging. This is a huge issue for Anbernic devices, but there shouldn't be any issues with this one. And I would be surprised if the T820 doesn't support fast charging from a chip level. If I connect my usual PD charger to the Cube, it does work, but the charging speed isn't that high. With my second adapter, it's a bit higher. If we compare this to the RP4 Pro, that charges much faster at 17 watts with this battery level. So the Cube does support PD C2C charging, but it doesn't support quick charging. I did a 15-minute torture test in the Cube without the fan running, and these are the readings that I got. The front isn't too bad, especially in the controller area, and the same can be said for the back. We have a hot spot of 50 Celsius at the CPU with heat spilling down to the battery, but you shouldn't feel any of that heat when you're holding this in your hands, especially if you have the fan turned on. Before we jump into the performance showcase, I want to see if we can fix that light bleeding issue. With the shell off, we can see that the battery is not the heatsink, which proves that they know how to do this. We have a standard 3 PCB structure here with the controller boards connected to the main board, and we don't have a Type-C port on the bottom because the battery is in that location. Now that we have the shell off, I don't feel any rough action on the analog shoulder buttons. That must mean that they're scratching against the back shell. I think the issue is this spot right here, but it's not obvious based on the wear and tear that I have put on this thus far. For the light bleeding issue, this screw right here seems to be the problem, so I'm going to loosen that up a bit and then check back on the screen. The only other thing worth talking about here is that there's a large thermal pad under the main board that is resting against this metal frame. This is not the standard style used in handhelds, but it is way better than not having one at all. After working on the device a bit more, this is the best that I could get the screen, but this is without the back shell on. If I put that on, the spot on the right comes back. There are no screws causing that light bleed to happen. That is only from the back shell. I spent some more time working on this and I found the main cause of this issue. I thought it was caused by this wall here, so I cut them with some flush cutters. Doing that and loosening some of the heatsink screws improved the screen slightly, but in the end, it comes down to this. These push pins appear to connect to this antenna cable on the back shell. That alone is the biggest cause of this light bleeding issue, and I can prove this to be the case by pressing against that spot with my finger without the back shell on. After I put the back shell on, you'll see the same spot on the right lights up. Right now, I consider this to be a design flaw, and when I get a chance, I'm going to cut that square from the back shell to remove this force that presses against the screen. Unless something changes with manufacturing, all rgcubes should have this issue. Before getting back into the performance tests, I want to run some synthetic benchmarks on Geekbench 6, Geekbench 5, and 3D Mark. Based on these scores alone, this hardware should be very capable in terms of high-end emulation. When it comes to what this does well, there are a few systems that look good on this display. Things like Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Gear will look awesome on this screen with only some slight black borders on the top and the bottom. If you like top-down arcade shooters, those also look awesome on this display. The best option for this screen continues to be Pico 8. If you're only interested in Pico 8 games, this would be a pricey handheld for that system versus the RGB30, even though they do look awesome on this. When it comes to Super Nintendo, things are less than ideal. In 4x3 mode, we have big borders on the top and the bottom, but we can enable 8x7 to better utilize this display. After doing that, the experience is much better. For Genesis, I kept the 8x7 aspect ratio. This is the point where you need to pick what works best for you. For Nintendo 64, I kept the aspect ratio set to 8x7, but that doesn't mean you'll have consistent border sizes with all games. Some games will have bigger borders than others. In terms of performance, these games run at 2x native resolution. This is horrible. As you can probably guess, we're still at 8x7 for Dreamcast. These run great on this display, and they don't look that bad with this scaling.
AYANEO-san.
PlayStation 1 is the most interesting of this generation. Here's how the game looks by default. Let's go into the settings and turn the aspect ratio to 1:1 or match display. If you have widescreen hacks enabled, this will change your viewport to fit this screen perfectly. If the game is fully 3D like Crash Bandicoot, it looks awesome. You are losing some information on the sides, but the game isn't stretched. Again, this works best in fully 3D games. 2D elements may look a little strange, and games with pre-rendered backgrounds are handled a bit differently. With these settings applied, this is a system that I could see myself enjoying on this handheld with no problem. This is the end of our ideal situation. For DS, they have a theme applied that puts the bottom screen in a tiny window at the bottom of the panel. This is a serviceable option. .3DS is a bit better than DS, and I think this theme works way better than it should. Depending on what you're playing, the bottom panel is going to be a pain to work with, but the top feels great on this. The only issue with 3DS emulation on the Cube beyond games that perform badly is that the gyros don't seem to work by default. For GBA, there are 3 options that you can go with. The first is just to leave the normal aspect ratio with big borders on the top and the bottom. If you go into the settings and turn on integer scaling with integer scale over scale, you'll zoom in and cut off the edges of the game. As long as there isn't something that's too important there, this is a decent option for this screen. The other option is to just stretch the screen out to 8:7. PSP looks very bad on this device, even though it performs well. I have the aspect ratio set to 0.75, which is the highest that I would go on this. You can mess around with this to find something that suits your needs. Let's go over to some heavier emulation with GameCube and Wii.
Army now commencing third volley of cannon fire. Andross's ships are being destroyed one after the other. We can't give up now.
Andross's fleet is straight ahead. They're everywhere.
only have 2 systems left with Switch and PS2. Nintendo Switch emulation is possible here, but it's not worth it. There are way better handhelds out there for Switch gaming, including a real Switch. It's more of a cool tech demo than anything else with a 1x1 display. Our last system is PS2. I tested a bunch of games for this, and I'm surprised with the performance that I was able to get from the Cube. I tested most of these games at 2x, but I needed to drop down to 1x for heavier titles like God of War 1 and 2. Even with that, there are a lot of heavy PS2 games that are too demanding for the T820. I'm going to let the rest of these play out on the side of the screen while I go over my pros and cons on the rgcube. When it comes to the pros, there are a few things that surprise me with this handheld. The biggest pro has to be the ergonomics. This is a very comfortable, smallish handheld, and it is a huge improvement over 90% of the devices Anbernic sells. There is a big caveat with this next one, but I also think the build quality is good on this. There are no rattling sounds to be had here, and the components that they use feel nice. Anbernic has sold devices that are more expensive than this guy with way worse build quality. The performance is another pro for me. As you can see, this thing handles up to 2x PS2, which is nuts for something this compact. The obvious downside is that most of the things that can take advantage of this performance are not suited for a 1x1 display. Thermal performance is another pro. I typically don't use the fan on my device because it doesn't get that hot. In situations where you would benefit from a fan, putting this on auto is enough to handle the heat that it generates. Finally, battery life is another big pro for me. I ran some full drain battery tests, and these are the results that I got. These are really good numbers. When it comes to cons, I've got 2, and I think you already know number 1. The biggest con for me is the light bleeding that this has, and the worst part about this is that this isn't a screen roulette issue where some people won't have this. I'm sure all devices will have this because it's a structural issue with this device. While I was editing this video, I ended up cutting that square antenna on the back shell, and that got me 95% of the way to a perfect screen. On its own, this wouldn't be the end of the world. The problem is that you will have black borders on the top and the bottom of the screen for almost anything that you do with this, so you will always notice the light bleeding. It's not only an issue when you play darker games like it is on other devices. And that goes hand in hand with my final con, video out support. This thing is supposed to support 1080p video out via DisplayPort, and from everything that I've seen, that doesn't work as advertised. Most of the displays and adapters that I have don't work with this flat out, and the ones that do give me a 1x1 video signal, which is useless. This is the first handheld that I reviewed after my We Need to Talk video, so here is the pass-fail report that I would have released if I decided not to work on this review. Now that you've seen the entire review, this gives you an idea of how I get these ratings. That leaves us with my recommendations, and I'll try my best to point you in the right direction. I like this device, but it is super niche. The RGB30 was also a super niche device, and I thought someone would come in and just take the low-hanging fruit of making a better version at the same price point or less. This does many things objectively better than the RGB30, but it's also almost double the cost, which is not great. Anbernic must know that something like this has a smaller audience, so they're baking their required ROI into the price. I don't know how long that price is going to last, so I'm going to leave some guidelines here that may be useful for you in the future. If you're someone who believes the RGB30 is a good deal at $90, then I believe you would also feel this is worth the money up to, let's say, $150 shipped. More than that kind of depends on how badly you want a handheld that plays that initial group of systems well. This processor is better, all of the controls are better, it has better storage and features, the build quality is way better even with the obvious flaw, and it can do way more than that device can. This is an imperfect device, just like the RGB30. But at this point in time, it's the best device with this niche aspect ratio until someone comes around and does a better job, either with better hardware at a better price or with more attention to detail. I'll keep my eyes open. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see another, take a look at my review of the RGB30. Happy gaming, everyone. Taki out.